Every day, a dog would be seen peering into a storm drain, and when it was finally opened, people were shocked to see what was inside. Stray dogs are a common sight in many countries, but this particular dog's behavior caught the attention of many in Turkey. The scruffy and unkempt pup could often be found scavenging for food and water on the streets, and he followed his routine on this day, happily wagging his tail at anyone who crossed his path. Despite his tough circumstances, the friendly dog was always eager to receive pets and attention from kind passersby. While strolling down a street, he suddenly caught a whiff of something delicious, leading him to a nearby butcher's shop. However, as he explored the area, his attention was soon drawn to a storm drain. With his tail wagging furiously, he peered into it with unbridled curiosity. Every day, the dog would return to the storm drain, as if waiting for something to happen. Onlookers would often wonder what had caught his attention, but it wasn't until the drain was finally opened that the mystery was revealed. Lured by the smell of something delicious, the dog followed his nose to a nearby butcher's shop. Standing outside the window, he watched as customers purchased large cuts of meat for their evening meal. The sight of the food made the hungry dog realize just how famished he was, causing his stomach to emit a loud growl. Inside the shop, a young woman named Annie was finishing paying for a couple of large steaks. As she exited the shop, she began walking down the street toward her home, when she suddenly heard a loud gurgling sound accompanied by a whimper. Turning around, she saw the stray dog looking back at her with pitiful eyes. His stomach growled once again, and Annie realized the problem. The dog was clearly a stray and extremely hungry. Feeling sorry for the hungry animal, Annie looked down at the steaks she had just purchased and marched back into the butcher's shop. She asked the butcher for any cutoffs or bones that he wouldn't sell and could spare for the poor dog. The butcher happily obliged the woman's request, and Annie left the shop with the bones and cutoffs in hand. She scanned the area for the stray dog and found him watching her from a distance. Crouching down, she held out the bone to the cautious dog, who initially hesitated to come too close. However, as Annie persisted in holding out the food, the animal could not resist the temptation and eventually crept closer to accept the offering. Annie gradually gained the dog's trust, and he eventually wagged his tail as he accepted the large bone from her. Instead of devouring the food immediately, the dog picked it up and walked away, as if he had somewhere to be. Although confused by the dog's behavior, Annie didn't question it too much and returned home. The following day, as Annie was walking down the street, she spotted the same stray dog from the day before. The dog noticed Annie and bounded up to her with enthusiasm, wagging his tail and prompting a smile from the woman. Although she had places to be, she took a moment to fuss over the animal, and even bought him some sausages from a nearby shop. But once again, the dog didn't eat them right away and walked off. Annie couldn't help but wonder about the dog's behavior, but she had to go about her day. On the third day, Annie encountered the stray dog once more, and this time it appeared as though he was waiting for her. The woman had started carrying treats in her bag in the hopes of feeding the poor stray. She smiled as she approached the dog and offered him the treats. When the dog turned around and walked away, Annie followed him. Eventually, they arrived at a busy street, and Annie watched as the shaggy dog made his way over to a storm drain. The dog sat next to the storm drain, dropping one of the treats Annie had given him before eating his own. Annie was confused by the dog's behavior, as every time she brought him food, he would stare into the drain and drop half of it before eating. Her curiosity grew until she decided to investigate for herself, but she never anticipated what she would find. With the dog standing guard, Annie peered into the drain and was horrified by what she saw. She immediately called the fire department for help. Within half an hour, a team of firefighters arrived and asked Annie what had happened. She explained the situation, and the team quickly got to work. As the firemen emerged with each kitten, the crowd couldn't believe their eyes. 5 kittens in total had been living in the storm drain, and the mother cat was nowhere to be seen. Annie was relieved that she had followed the dog's strange behavior and was able to help rescue the kittens. She offered to take the animals to the vet to get checked out, and the firemen gratefully accepted her help. They carefully handed over the kittens to Annie, and the stray dog followed them as they left the scene. Annie knew she couldn't keep all the kittens, but she was determined to find them all loving homes. Over the next few days, Annie worked tirelessly to find each of the kittens a new family and was able to keep in touch with each of the new owners to see how the kittens were doing. She even found a home for the stray dog who had led her to the kittens. Annie felt a great sense of satisfaction knowing that she had helped bring happiness to the lives of these animals and the people who had adopted them. Annie was amazed by what she was seeing. She had suspected that something was down there when she peeked in, but she had no idea that there were 5 adorable and tiny kittens trapped. At that moment, the stray dog managed to wriggle out of Annie's arms and bounded over to the fireman who had the kittens. As soon as the dog saw the small felines, he immediately began to wag his tail and sniff at them, while the kittens mewed back at the canine. Annie approached the firemen and asked how such young kittens had ended up in such a predicament. They told her that it was likely they were swept into the drain during a heavy rain, but considering they had been trapped, they weren't starving. Upon hearing this information, Annie looked over at the stray dog. She knew that it was thanks to his act of sharing his food every day that the kittens had survived. She was inspired by the kind act of selflessness and knew what she wanted to do. Annie was amazed by what she had witnessed. She had known that something was in the drain, but she never expected to find 5 adorable kittens trapped there. The stray dog managed to wriggle out of Annie's arms and ran over to the firemen who were holding the kittens. As soon as he saw the tiny felines, he wagged his tail and sniffed at them, while the kittens meowed back at him. Annie spoke to the firemen and offered to take the kittens home with her to raise them until they were ready to be rehomed. The firemen agreed and gave her the kittens, and Annie began making her way home. Before leaving, she called out to the stray dog, "Come on, Benny, it's time to go home." The canine happily bounded up to her, and he looked after all of the kittens. Annie found loving homes for 4 of the kittens when they were old enough to be adopted, but she kept one for herself as she had grown to love them all. She also couldn't bear to leave Benny on the streets after what he had done for the tiny felines, so she gave him a home too. The family lived happily together, and neither Fudge the cat nor Benny were ever worried about ending up on the streets again. They were loved too much by Annie, and they loved her just as much in return. It was an amazing story. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to keep up to date with more awesome tales.